Hello. Today General Hospital will reveal the week began in a suffocating tension that blanketed Port Charles like a thick, invisible fog. As dawn's first light hesitantly crept across the city skyline, an explosion shattered the fragile peace and sent a surge of terror rippling through the streets. Charlie's Pub, a humble, well-loved establishment nestled on the edge of the waterfront, was instantly transformed from a place of community into the epicenter of yet another horrifying attack. Without warning, a firebomb tore through the windowpane, crashing into the bar and igniting the hidden fuel within. The blast was immediate and unforgiving, consuming the wooden interior with ferocity. The comforting smell of brewed coffee and aged wood was replaced by the acrid stench of smoke, scorched flesh, and fear. Screams pierced the rising inferno, and in the midst of it all, Kristina found herself trapped, caught in a whirlwind of flame, chaos, and terror that defied all logic or preparation. Her presence at Charlie's that morning, routine, benign, ordinary, had suddenly become a matter of life and death. Kristina had always lived on the edge of danger. As the daughter of a powerful mob boss, she had grown up under the shadow of Sonny's name, navigating the murky waters of respect, fear, and family loyalty. But nothing could have prepared her for this. The heat engulfed her almost instantly, the flames licking at her clothing, searing her skin, choking the air from her lungs. Her body refused to move fast enough, her instincts dulled by the surreal shock of the moment. Everything around her, chairs, bottles, drapes, became part of the inferno. It was as if the fire itself had come alive, targeting her, hunting her. Time slowed as smoke billowed upward in thick, black waves. And the sound of collapsing beams echoed like a war drum in the distance. For Kristina, it was no longer a fire, it was an unrelenting force determined to consume her whole, physically and psychologically. In those searing seconds, she didn't think of survival. She thought of her family, of unfinished conversations, of the fear in her mother's voice, and most hauntingly, of the moment when she realized she might never escape. Meanwhile, across town, Sonny stood frozen in time. The news of the second fire reached him not with the sterile efficiency of a phone call but with the gut-wrenching panic of a scream carried by fate. This wasn't just another act of arson. This was personal. The scars from the previous attack hadn't healed, not for Sonny, not for Michael, who had barely recovered after being injured in the last suspicious blaze. But this? This was something altogether different. It was his daughter. His blood. The child he had sworn to protect from the very darkness that he himself embodied. And now, someone had dared to cross a line that could never be uncrossed. In Sonny's mind, the line between business and vengeance dissolved completely. The fire had ignited more than wood, it had set ablaze the last remnants of restraint in his soul. He wasn't merely furious. He was transformed. The rage that surged through Sonny was unlike anything he had felt before. It was cold, methodical, and calculating, a fire of its own kind. He had always kept his enemies close. But he no longer wanted proximity. He wanted eradication. He wanted justice wrapped in violence. And most terrifyingly, he believed he knew exactly who had done this. All signs, every whisper in the street, every unearthed rumor, pointed to one name, Sidwell. The audacious criminal who had once tried to buy out Sonny's criminal empire as if it were a stock portfolio. An offer Sonny had rejected with the unyielding confidence of a king dismissing a usurper. But Sidwell didn't take rejection lightly. In his twisted worldview, no was not an answer but a declaration of war. And now, it appeared he was carrying out his vengeance with precision and cruelty. The earlier fire had been tragic, but ambiguous. The evidence was circumstantial, the motives unclear. But this time, the intent was unmistakable. The use of Sonny's own stolen explosives, photographed and leaked into the criminal underworld, was a message in blood and ash. Sidwell wasn't just striking back. He was mocking Sonny. He was repurposing Sonny's own tools of violence against him, turning the hunter into the hunted. It was an act of war, cloaked in shadows and executed in fire. And though the city had no official suspect, everyone knew who was responsible. Everyone, that is, except the law, which still couldn't touch Sidwell. Somehow, through a combination of bribery, manipulation, and sheer cunning, he had once again vanished from the scene, leaving only carnage behind and a trail too faint to follow. What remained in his wake, however, was not just debris and injury, but something far more dangerous, Sonny's wrath. No longer a man seeking peace or balance, Sonny became a storm brewing in human form. A fury that threatened to consume more than just one man. The entire city could feel it, an unspoken dread settling over Port Charles. Every whisper in the alley, every side glance in the diner, every nervous hand on a holstered weapon spoke to the same collective anxiety. Sonny was on the warpath, and this time, he would not be stopped by the boundaries of morality or law. He had suffered too much, lost too many, and with Kristina now burned and broken, teetering on the edge between life and death, he was ready to ensure that Sidwell would never have another chance to strike again. But Sidwell, ever the serpent, had already begun slithering into his next hiding place, shedding guilt like a second skin. There were no fingerprints, no witnesses willing to speak, and no evidence that could stick. For the second time, he had orchestrated destruction without leaving a trace, evading justice with the ease of a ghost. His silence mocked the chaos he left behind, while Kristina fought for her life in a hospital bed, and Alexis fell to pieces at her daughter's side, racked by memories of Sam's death and the unbearable thought of burying another child. Sidwell watched from the shadows, untouched, unbothered, and perhaps, already planning what, or who, would burn next. Meanwhile, at General Hospital, the once vibrant spirit of Kristina lay motionless beneath layers of white gauze. Her fragile frame nearly unrecognizable. Her body, swathed in sterile bandages, bore witness to the brutality of the flames. Deep burns stretched across her arms, chest, and face. A cruel reminder of the violence she had endured. But it wasn't the scorched skin or the bruises that terrified those who loved her, it was her eyes. Even through the haze of sedation and trauma, there was something disturbingly vacant about her gaze. When her eyelids fluttered open, they revealed a blank, distant stare that looked not at the present, but through it, into a space filled with shadows and silence. That hollow expression whispered of a mind spiraling inward, retreating to a place where the screams, the heat, and the fire had become eternal. The boundaries between reality and nightmare had collapsed inside her, and she was trapped in the smoldering ruins of both. Beside her, Alexis stood frozen in a state of grief so profound it had no language. The woman who once commanded courtrooms with ironclad logic now trembled like a frightened child. Her hands clasped and knotted so tightly they had turned white. The memories of losing Sam were never far, always lurking beneath the surface of her resolve, but now they returned with brutal force. Seeing Kristina like this, fighting to breathe, suspended between life and death, resurrected the old trauma in vivid, unbearable clarity. Every beep of the heart monitor, every rise and fall of Kristina's burned chest, felt like a countdown toward a moment Alexis had once promised herself she'd never face again. Tears streamed unchecked down her face. But they were not tears of release, they were the silent screams of a mother watching helplessly as her daughter dangled on the edge of oblivion. The pain wasn't explosive or loud, it was slow, relentless, and consuming, like a dull blade carving grief into her soul with every passing second. Outside Kristina's hospital room, the world continued moving, but for Alexis, time had fractured. The hallway was filled with doctors and nurses going about their duties, unaware that Alexis was barely standing under the weight of what might become her second loss. She had always been the rational one, the one who believed in justice and reason, but now all she had was raw fear, fear that Kristina might never come back, not just physically, but emotionally. And that fear was sharpened by guilt. Had she pushed Kristina too far? Had she failed to protect her? The questions circled endlessly, and each one stabbed deeper than the last. Alexis whispered silent prayers she no longer fully believed in, clinging to hope as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. In her heart, she vowed that if Kristina opened her eyes again, truly opened them, she would never let her daughter out of her sight. While Alexis wept, Anna and Chase remained locked in the grim business of uncovering the truth. They stood among the scorched remains of Charlie's pub, the scent of soot and charred wood clinging to their clothes. The building had been reduced to a skeleton, blackened walls, twisted metal, and the bitter remnants of what had once been a place of laughter and familiarity. Their eyes scanned the debris for any sign of origin, any clue that could link this latest inferno to the one before. And the deeper they dug, the more apparent it became that this was not a random act. It was calculated. It was personal. Someone had known exactly when and where to strike, and they had done so with surgical precision. The fingerprints had been wiped, the device thoroughly incinerated, and yet the signature was there. For those who had seen this kind of darkness before, it was unmistakable. Back in the shadows of Port Charles, Sonny retreated into the depths of his own mind. He no longer needed confirmation of who was behind the fire. He didn't care about the legal system, about investigations, or about justice handed down in a courtroom. He wanted revenge. In the quiet of his penthouse, with the lights dim and the weight of the world pressing against his shoulders, Sonny made his list. It wasn't long, just a few names. But one of them, written in ink that bled into the paper like venom, was circled and read, Sidwell. The man who had dared to strike at him not once, but twice. The man who had wounded his son and now threatened to take his daughter. To Sonny, this was no longer a game of power or territory. This was a declaration of war. A line had been crossed that could never be uncrossed, and the response would be swift, merciless, and final. The underworld of Port Charles braced for what was to come. Allies fell silent. Enemies grew restless. Everyone knew the rules had changed. When Sonny moved like this, calm, deliberate, and silent, it meant only one thing: blood would be spilled. The fire wasn't just an act of terror, it was a challenge to Sonny's very existence. And if Sidwell thought he could burn down the life Sonny had built without consequence, he had vastly underestimated the fury of a father whose family had been attacked. Sonny's grief had metastasized into something far more dangerous than sorrow. It had become a mission. One that wouldn't end until the man responsible was not only caught, but obliterated. But Sidwell wasn't hiding in fear. He had already slithered into another layer of anonymity. His trail growing colder with each passing hour. He had mastered the art of evasion, of leaving just enough confusion behind to cloud the waters of pursuit. Sonny's connections scoured every corner of the city, but Sidwell was nowhere to be found. His escape wasn't just physical, it was psychological. He knew Sonny's rage, knew the steps he would take. And he had calculated every move like a chess player who always thinks 5 steps ahead. He hadn't just struck at Sonny's family. He had orchestrated an emotional siege. Dismantling the mafia kingpin from within, using grief as the most potent weapon of all. And so, as Kristina lay unconscious, as Alexis prayed with a mother's desperation, and as Sonny sharpened the blade of vengeance in his mind, a new chapter of destruction waited to unfold. The fire at Charlie's was only the beginning, a match that lit the fuse of a war destined to consume more than just its original players. In Port Charles, the smoke had not yet cleared. But the scent of blood was already in the air. But Sidwell was not simply evading justice, he was orchestrating something far more sinister, more calculated, and more insidious than any overt act of violence. While law enforcement scrambled to piece together the ashes of Charlie's pub and Sonny rallied his inner circle for retribution, Sidwell moved through the underbelly of Port Charles like a phantom, untouched by the flames he had ignited. He wasn't hiding out of fear, he was hiding with purpose. In the dimmest corridors of the city's criminal infrastructure, abandoned warehouses, safe houses deep within shuttered buildings, whispers exchanged in coded language, he weaved a new narrative. One that blurred the lines between truth and fabrication. While others sought facts, Sidwell dealt in perception. He knew that in a world ruled by alliances and fear, the story people believed was more dangerous than the truth. To that end, Sidwell launched a campaign not only of sabotage, but of psychological warfare. He bribed low-level officers to misplace or obscure evidence. He leaked doctored security footage to undercut the investigation. He used shell organizations to anonymously fund whispers and rumors, sowing doubt where there had once been loyalty. More than once, Sonny's most trusted allies began to question each other, murmurs about betrayal, about shifting loyalties, about who might have allowed Sidwell to strike twice. The once impenetrable core of the Corinthos operation began to show cracks, not from force, but from suggestion. Sidwell's genius was not in brute strength, but in exploiting human weakness. And while Sonny readied for war with visible fury, Sidwell played a quieter, more elegant game, divide and conquer. Even as Sonny drew up battle plans and issued silent commands through his network of enforcers, Sidwell was already 5 moves ahead. He manipulated old debts and old enemies, coaxing them back into the spotlight. He pitted them against each other, against Sonny, and against the fragile peace that had always teetered on the edge of chaos in Port Charles. He wasn't just targeting Sonny's children anymore, he was targeting his legacy, the very foundation of what made Sonny untouchable. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that if he could fracture Sonny's empire from within, no amount of vengeance would be enough to rebuild it. He didn't need to kill Sonny. He only needed to ensure Sonny destroyed himself. And yet, amidst the silent storm brewing on all sides, Alexis did what no one else dared. Driven by a grief she could no longer contain and a fury that defied logic, she made her way into the shadows, not as a lawyer, not as a public figure, but as a mother. A mother who had already buried one daughter and now stood on the precipice of losing another. It was desperation that guided her steps, but it was something more elemental that kept her upright, resolve. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. Not Sonny. Not the police. She simply followed the breadcrumbs until she found herself face to face with the man she believed had nearly ended her daughter's life. The meeting was not loud. It was not violent. It was not scripted with the fire and fury of a courtroom indictment. It was something colder, darker, 2 people confronting each other not with weapons, but with truths. Alexis carried the unbearable weight of loss, and Sidwell, the smug certainty of power. The tension between them was like a taut wire stretched to its breaking point. Alexis stood with her heart exposed, trembling with both fear and righteous rage, while Sidwell studied her with the detached interest of a man who had seen countless lives ruined and barely blinked. In her eyes, there flickered the ghost of justice, of accountability. But also the flicker of vengeance. And Sidwell saw it. He understood it. And he mocked it. To Alexis, the conversation was more than confrontation, it was warning. Because she knew what Sonny would do next. Everyone did. But she, perhaps more than anyone, understood that once Sonny crossed the line he was nearing, there would be no return. There would be no more negotiation, no more restraint. There would only be fire. And if Sidwell continued to target those Sonny loved, if Michael and Kristina were only the beginning, then the whole city would burn. The bodies wouldn't be limited to those in the Corinthos inner circle. The war would reach judges, police commissioners, innocent families caught in the crossfire. It would not be revenge. It would be annihilation. The question was no longer if Sidwell would strike again, but who would be next. His pattern was deliberate, intimate. He didn't kill randomly, he made statements. Each attack was chosen with precision, designed to unmoor Sonny not just as a father, but as a leader. He wanted to see Sonny undone piece by piece. Not in a single blow but in the agony of slow unraveling. And if that meant watching the people around Sunny descend into paranoia, suspicion, or betrayal, then so be it. Sidwell didn't seek Sunny's death. He sought Sunny's destruction, mental, emotional, institutional. And he was frighteningly close to achieving it. If that day came. If the next strike truly did shatter what remained of the Corinthos foundation, Port Charles would not survive unscathed. The city would become a battlefield without borders, where alliances meant nothing and collateral damage was the only certainty. Blood would run in the streets, innocents, enforcers, politicians, all indistinguishable in the carnage. Love, hatred, justice, and vengeance would blur into a single, crimson tide, and by the time it receded, there might be nothing left to salvage. In his cold brilliance, Sidwell wasn't just attacking Sunny, he was rewriting the rules of Port Charles itself. And no one, not even those untouched by fire, would emerge from this war unchanged. Port Charles now exists in a fragile and volatile limbo, suspended between the illusion of normalcy and the looming certainty of collapse. The image of Kristina lying unconscious in a hospital bed, her body wrapped in sterile bandages and her face scarred by flame, has come to represent more than personal tragedy, it is the embodiment of an entire city's descent into chaos. Her injuries are not just physical, they are the manifestation of a war waged in the shadows, where each explosion and each whispered betrayal inches the community closer to disaster. The hospital's sterile halls have become cathedrals of grief, where hope and fear wrestle in silence. And above all, the question lingers, if Sunny, the one man who has always kept the city's criminal underworld in check through power and intimidation, is now unraveling, who will be left to stop the next act of destruction? Alexis, once the voice of law and reason, has become a reflection of what unchecked grief can do to a soul. Her confrontation with Sidwell did not yield the justice she longed for, nor the closure she so desperately needed. Instead, it exposed a deeper, more haunting truth: there are some enemies that cannot be prosecuted, only confronted. Her silent rage, her tear-soaked pleas, and her fractured morality now mirror the same darkness she spent her entire career opposing. Her journey into the heart of the enemy's lair did not reclaim her daughter's safety, it only awakened the realization that the line between justice and vengeance, once so clearly defined in her world, has blurred into something dangerous. Alexis has crossed a personal Rubicon, and in doing so, she has unknowingly contributed to the storm that now threatens to consume the city. Sunny, no stranger to war, is no longer operating from a place of calculated dominance but from the raw, unfiltered desperation of a father pushed to the edge. The attack on Kristina has unmoored him in ways even he cannot fully comprehend. For years, he ruled with a balance of loyalty and fear, ensuring stability through unspoken codes and hard-earned respect. But now, with both Michael and Kristina targeted, those codes are shattered, and respect has given way to fury. His instincts tell him to strike, to retaliate, to burn Sidwell and everyone who stands near him to the ground. Yet even Sunny must recognize that such an act of vengeance will not be surgical, it will be catastrophic. Every ally he once trusted is now a potential traitor. Every piece of his empire trembling under the weight of psychological warfare. Sidwell has not merely challenged Sunny's authority, he has dismantled the very foundation of it from within, and now, Sunny's response threatens to plunge the city into irreversible war. And somewhere in the shadows, Sidwell waits, calculating each move with the detachment of a man who sees people as pawns and cities as playgrounds. His plan has never been merely to destroy Sunny, but to redefine the rules of engagement in Port Charles. By turning Sunny's loved ones into targets, by poisoning the well of trust among his enemies and allies alike, Sidwell has forced a transformation in the city's underworld. What once operated under a brutal but predictable order now teeters on the brink of chaos, where fear rules and no one is safe. As fire gives way to silence and ash settles over familiar streets, it is clear that this war is no longer about power or revenge, it is about survival. And when the final reckoning arrives, It will not only determine who remains standing, but what, if anything, of Port Charles will be left to rebuild.